Why did the most powerful kings in history intentionally feed their own families to vultures? You might think this is just some barbaric ancient ritual, something from a horror movie. But what if I told you that leaving a body on a tower to be eaten by birds was actually the most scientifically advanced, sanitary, and respectful way to handle death in the ancient world? To understand why, we have to look at the Tower of Silence. It sounds like a fantasy location, but for the Persians it was a very real, very necessary piece of engineering. See, we usually only have two options when we die. You either get buried in the ground or you get cremated. To us, that's normal. To an ancient Persian Zoroastrian, both of those options were absolutely criminal. Here is the problem they faced. In the Persian religion, the elements are sacred. Earth is holy, fire is holy, water is holy. So imagine you have a dead body. In the ancient mindset, a corpse is the most unclean thing in the universe. As soon as the soul leaves, the body starts to rot. Decay sets in. If you bury that rotting body in the ground, you are polluting the holy earth. That's a sin. If you throw that body onto a funeral pyre, like the Greeks or Romans did, you are polluting the holy fire with the stench of death. That is a massive sin. You can't throw it in the river because water is pure. So you're stuck. You have a body that is essentially a biological weapon of spiritual pollution, and you have nowhere to put it. This is where the revelation comes in. They didn't choose the sky because they were savages. They chose the sky because it was the only clean option left. They built these massive circular structures on top of hills or mountains. They called them Dakhma. We call them Towers of Silence. The design of these things is actually kind of genius. It's not just a flat roof. It's a machine for death. Picture a large stone cylinder open to the sky. Inside there are 3 concentric circles. The outer ring was for men, the middle ring for women, the inner ring for children. When someone died, professional handlers, the only people allowed to touch the dead, would carry the body up to the tower. They would strip off the clothes, because you arrive in this world naked and you leave naked. Then they would lay the body down on the stone and leave. Now this is the part that freaks people out. Within minutes, the vultures would descend. I know, it sounds gruesome. But in the Persian mindset, the vulture wasn't a monster. It was a purifier. It was a divine creature designed by God to clean the earth. Think about the efficiency. A burial takes years to decompose. A cremation takes huge amounts of wood and energy. A flock of vultures can strip a body down to clean white bone in less than an hour. It's fast, it's brutal, but it's incredibly clean. Once the bones were stripped and dried by the desert sun, which was considered a purifying laser beam from the heavens, the handlers would return. They would push the bleached bones into a deep central pit in the middle of the tower, called the ossuary. But here is the part that proves this wasn't just superstition. It was ancient sanitation engineering. At the bottom of that bone pit, they had layers of charcoal and sand. When rain washed over the bones, the water would filter through the charcoal before it ever touched the soil. They literally built ancient water filtration systems into their graveyards to make sure not a single drop of death water contaminated the groundwater. While Europe was throwing bodies into mass graves and causing plagues, the Persians had designed a system that completely neutralized the spread of disease. But there's another layer to this story. something darker that kept the Persians up at night. They weren't just afraid of bacteria, they were afraid of the Nasu. In Zoroastrian mythology, the Druji Nasu is the corpse demon. It's described as a fly, a buzzing, hideous fly that rushes into the body the moment the breath leaves it. This demon is contagious. If you touch the dead, the demon jumps to you. This is why they had the dog gaze. Before they even took the body to the tower, they would bring in a dog, preferably a white dog with yellow spots above its eyes, which they called a four-eyed dog. They believed the dog could see the demon. If the dog looked at the body and didn't react, the person might still be alive. If the dog stared or barked, the demon was present, and the person was definitely dead. It sounds like magic, but practically, it was a fail-safe against burying people alive. The dog was the medical examiner. Now, you might be wondering, what about the famous kings? What about Cyrus the Great or Darius? We see their tombs today. They have massive stone mausoleums carved into cliffs at Nakhche-Rustam. They weren't eaten by birds, were they? This is one of the biggest contradictions in history. Cyrus the Great has a tomb. We can visit it. So clearly he wasn't put on a tower. Historians think that the early Achaemenid kings might have found a loophole. To avoid polluting the earth, they were put in stone coffins that were sealed so tight nothing could leak out. Or they were covered in wax before burial to create a barrier between the unclean flesh and the clean stone. The Towers of Silence were likely for the priests and the common people initially, and the practice spread over time. But the most beautiful part of this terrifying ritual is the equality of it. In a Tower of Silence, it doesn't matter if you were a wealthy merchant with a massive estate or a poor farmer with nothing. Everyone goes to the same tower. Everyone is laid on the same stone. Everyone is stripped of their clothes and their jewels. The birds don't care who you were. The sun doesn't care how much gold you had. Within an hour, the king and the peasant look exactly the same, just white bones in the pit. It was a radical statement that in death all hierarchies dissolve. This practice survived for thousands of years. In fact, it didn't really stop in Iran until the 1970s, when the modern government banned it for sanitary reasons, which is ironic considering the whole point was sanitation. Today, in places like India, the Parsi community, descendants of ancient Persians, still struggle to keep this tradition alive. But they have a new problem. The vultures are dying out. Modern drugs given to livestock are killing the birds. Without the vultures, the system breaks. The bodies don't disappear. The Towers of Silence, which worked perfectly for 3,000 years, are failing because the ecosystem is broken. It forces us to look at our own way of death. We pump bodies full of toxic embalming fluids and bury them in concrete vaults, or we burn fossil fuels to cremate them. The Persians looked at the circle of life and said, let's feed the earth by feeding the sky. So, knowing what you know now, that it's faster, cleaner, and returns you to nature instantly, if you had the choice today, would you choose the Tower of Silence over a modern grave? Let me know in the comments below what you think about the sky burial.